Welcome to Darkness Notes Coaches, terrifying secrets, and mysterious stories that will make you tremble. Do you want to know what it sounds like when a family vanishes without a sound? It's not screaming, it's not crying, it's silence. A silence so absolute that even the crows outside stopped cawing. One morning in 1965, the Higgins family of Ashworth, England, simply ceased to exist. Breakfast half-eaten, front door locked, beds undisturbed, no sign of struggle, no footprints in the fog. Only one thing remained, a black iron key left on the church steps, wrapped in a child's drawing. That drawing showed something no child should know. A stone room beneath St. Mary's Church, and four faceless figures kneeling in front of an altar carved with symbols the church once hunted men to erase. This is not a ghost story. This is not folklore. This is what happens when ancient knowledge is unearthed, where it was buried on purpose. Welcome to the silent nightmare of the Higgins family. And once you hear what was found beneath the floorboards of St. Mary's, you'll understand why even the church refused to speak. Take a breath, because the descent begins now. Ashworth, 1965. The kind of village where bloodlines are older than maps, where surnames echo across grave markers going back 800 years, where the post office, the school, and the pub all operate like organs of a single breathing entity, an entity that smiles on the surface and strangles in secret. Thomas Higgins was a reliable man, the kind of man who could disappear for a single hour, and someone would notice. So when he, his wife, Lenina, and their two children, Margaret and Billy, vanished without warning, without signs of travel, without packing even a toothbrush, the villagers of Ashworth didn't whisper. They stayed silent, because they already knew. They knew the Higginses had gotten too close to something buried, not just beneath the church, but beneath the history of England itself. See, St. Mary's Church wasn't just a relic from the 12th century. It had been built on top of something older, Saxon stonework, pagan sanctuaries. Before that, the Moors whispered of offerings made in the dark, long before Christianity colonized the human soul. And the Higgins family was not the first to vanish. Back in 1891, a woman named Elsabeth Carr disappeared along with her three sisters. No police report, no investigation, just an unmarked headstone in the churchyard, placed backwards, a sign, in the old rites, of someone buried without blessing. When church records were unsealed in 1985, records, sealed under royal order, investigators found pages torn from the burial log, pages dated 1965. Next to them, a note scribbled in Latin: "They are not lost, they are kept. Let me teach you something you were never supposed to learn. True power is never erased. It is buried, under cathedrals, under laws, under culture, but it waits. It waits for a family like the Higginses, curious, devout, obedient, but only up to a point." Lenina was the key. Her curiosity about the old ways, her knowledge of plants that no longer grew in textbooks. She began reading texts from before the Reformation, before Rome, books like the Neni Codex and the 12 Vessels of Light and Stone, forbidden knowledge whispered down through the Ashworth families by blood, not books. When Reverend Harold Whitmore noticed her interest, he didn't warn her, he welcomed her. He told her of the Preservation Society, of a room beneath the vestry, sealed since the Black Plague, of the resonant path, an ancient ritual calendar preserved by select Anglican scholars in secret, masked as liturgical reform. It wasn't reform, it was recovery, of a technology, of the soul. Ask yourself this: what would make a priest, a physician, and a schoolteacher form a society that never published a single paper? What would they risk their careers, their names, their families for? Because it wasn't just about history, it was about continuity, an unbroken chain not of belief, but of practice. They believed that beneath the surface of Christianity was something more ancient, older than the cross, more commanding than prayer, a system that did not ask for devotion but demanded blood memory. And Lenina, she belonged to it, she just didn't know, until she was invited into the room. They called it the lower sanctuary, but in older tongues, it had another name: Caia Lucentum, the chamber of knowing. Stone floor, no windows, a single iron altar, symbols cut, not with tools but with something hot enough to melt rock, no electricity, yet the room hummed, a resonance, a pulse, like breath, like something alive. Thomas followed her in October of 1964. He saw the drawings, heard the chants, he heard Reverend Whitmore speak of alignments, days when the veil between man and force thins. Thomas didn't want to believe, but he knew. His children had already been brought inside. Not by force, but through initiation. Margaret had memorized verses in a language no one had taught her. Billy was drawing the altar accurately before ever seeing it. They were not being abducted. They were being absorbed. Let me pause here. If you're still with me, if your breath is shallow, if your gut says something real is being said here, then leave a comment below with this phrase, "The shadow remembers." Type it twice. Lock it in, not for the algorithm, but for your own descent, because from this point forward, we don't come back, we go deeper. And now you see the truth. The Higgins family didn't disappear. They were taken by agreement, by blood, by right. The fog rolled in thicker than ever on the morning of October 23, 1965. It wasn't mist anymore. It was a Walden's cold and humming, the kind of fog that doesn't just blur your vision. It pulls you inward, makes you forget why you stepped outside in the first place. That was the morning the bells rang on their own. No one pulled the ropes. They rang from beneath. 3 mournful strikes, followed by silence. Not a soul in Ashworth moved. Doors stayed shut, curtains drawn. Dogs refused to bark. And behind the sealed door in the undercroft of St. Mary's bricked up. Since the reign of Edward III, something clicked. Something opened, and it was Sergeant Henley who entered first. Not because he wanted to, but because he had been having dreams. Night after night for 7 days straight, he saw fireless candles flickering in a circular chamber. He saw the children, he saw the mother, and he heard a voice, whispering, "You will bear witness." Let me tell you what Henley found behind that door. They didn't use mortar. The bricks were sealed with resin, pitch black, hardened like stone, etched with symbols that weren't Latin. He documented everything, or tried to. His journal entry from that morning was simple: door unsealed, sound beyond stone like chanting, faint smell of burnt thyme and blood proceeding against all judgment. The door groaned open, not outward but inward, like a mouth, and behind it, the room, exactly as Billy had drawn it, circular, stone, black altar at the center, 4 pillars shaped not like columns but like twisted figures, bent in agony, their faces frozen in a silence that screamed. On the altar, wax residue, scattered salt, 1 child's leather shoe, and a page so old the ink had bled into the fibers. What it said was worse than the symbols. 3 must gather, 1 must see, 1 must forget. Henley didn't understand it, but the others did. Mrs. Thornton, Reverend Whitmore, Dr. Carr. They had been waiting for this moment for decades, and the Higgins family were not victims. They were components. Do you understand now? This wasn't a disappearance. It was a ritual, a continuation of something ancient, buried in England's blood. Let me ask you something. What happens when a sacred tradition loses its worshippers? It waits, patiently, and when anyone remembers the old tongue, the old herbs, the old geometry, it comes back. You see, the church was never at war with paganism. It absorbed it, repackaged it, lit candles over it, and buried the bones underneath sanctified stone. But in Ashworth, the old flame never went out. They called it Lucerna Inconcessa, the unpermitted light. Not a god, not a demon. A system, a structure of consciousness. It didn't offer salvation. It offered clarity, and clarity requires sacrifice. The Higgins family crossed a line the moment they made the circle complete. 3 adults, 1 child of open sight. All the conditions aligned with the pre-Roman manuscript Reverend Whitmore had been guarding for 23 years. A manuscript older than Christianity in England, written in a blend of Proto-Celtic and Etruscan, containing diagrams so precise they mirrored electron flowcharts. Centuries before electricity, Elena translated most of it herself. She found references to the womb of stone, a family of 4, the child with the broken mirror, a phrase that appears in Mesopotamian cuneiform, Akkadian scrolls, and Mayan codices alike. She didn't just read ancient knowledge, she activated it. Margaret Rose had the mirror, not a physical one, a perception. She could see into the edge, Reverend Whitmore said, into moments that didn't exist yet, but were about to. And Billy was the lock. His innocence made the ritual stick. That's why his drawings weren't just art, they were seals. Sympathetic diagrams, images that, when repeated, bind events into motion. One of Billy's drawings, now sealed in the British National Archives, under protective shielding, showed the interior of the chamber before it was opened, not just a match. An identical replica, even down to a crack in the 3rd pillar's base. How could a boy know that unless the ritual had already started? Not in 1965, but in 1187, when St. Mary's was first constructed, stone by stone, according to geometric principles that matched pagan ley lines, not Christian tradition. The altar is aligned to the winter solstice, not the nativity. The church tower's shadow falls perfectly on the grave of Elizabeth Carr every 72 years too. The minute the Higgins family didn't awaken the ritual, they were the first to complete it. They were designed for it, chosen, bred, watched, waited for. And what happened after October 23rd? Nothing. Not a whisper, not a scream. Just the return of the fog. And for empty beds the next morning, Whitmore delivered a sermon.com/measured, reflective. Some light, he said, is not meant to shine in public. It burns too hot. It reveals too much. And it demands everything. He stepped down from the pulpit, resigned 2 days later, disappeared the following month. No investigation, no castigation, no coverage, just silence. But you're hearing this now because someone did remember. Sergeant Henley's private journals locked in a family vault until his death in 2003 contained full transcriptions, diagrams, and audio recordings from the chamber. They've never been released to the public, but I've seen them, I've heard the chanting, and I'm telling you now, this wasn't an isolated event. It was a reactivation of something old, older than the church, older than England, older than memory itself. He was 14 years old when it happened. David Whitlock, the last person to see the Higgins family alive, and the only one to ever speak of it without trembling. He'd been playing by the stone wall near the churchyard that October evening, for the fog to roll in, as boys in strange towns sometimes do when they don't understand what's calling them. He didn't know what he was waiting for. He only knew that something wanted him there, and then he saw it. He told me this himself. His voice didn't shake, but his hands, they never stopped trembling during the entire interview. It wasn't like they were taken, he said. It was like they knew it was time. He watched the Higgins family walk together, hand in hand, through the gates of St. Mary's just as the bells began to ring. All four of them, dressed in white, barefoot, carrying nothing. He called out to Billy, his friend from school, but Billy didn't turn. He didn't even blink. He just smiled. That empty smile children wear when they're dreaming with their eyes open. David followed, through the fog, into the church, but he didn't find them in the pews, or the vestry, or the sanctuary. No, he found the bricked wall in the undercroft already gone, the passage open, the air warm and alive with something that wasn't wind. It sounded like metal breathing, David said, like chains sliding over stone, but without weight. He took 3 steps down and stopped, because what he saw wasn't a room. It was a convergence of time, of geometry, of will. The Higginses stood in a perfect circle around the altar, eyes closed, whispering in a language David couldn't understand until he realized they weren't whispering at all. The room was speaking through them. Margaret's eyes opened first. She looked directly at David. She saw him, and that's when she said it. "You're not chosen, but you're allowed to see." He fell backwards, hit the steps, blacked out. When he woke up, the chamber was sealed again. The Higginses were gone. He told no one, not at first. He was 14. He thought it was a dream, a head injury, a moment of madness, until he returned the next day. And the door was still sealed. Until he saw the stone that had never been cracked before now split. Until he walked through Ashworth, and no one mentioned the family again. Not "Have you seen Thomas?" Not "Where are the children?" Nothing. It was as if the Higgins family had never existed. Let me say that again. For people born, raised, known, seen, and the entire village pretended they never were. David began asking questions, and that's when they came for him. First, Reverend Whitmore. He told him it was a test, that the village had always protected the threshold, and now David would have to make a choice. Forget or serve. Then Dr. Carr, who prescribed memory stabilizers, pills that made David forget what day it was, but not what he'd seen. The chamber lived in him now. He dreamed in symbols. He began drawing like Billy. Not art bindings. The same 3 figures, the same altar, the same phrase. 3 must gather, 1 must see, 1 must forget. But David didn't forget. He left Ashworth at 18, went to Cambridge, studied theology, and found something wrong in every doctrine, every religious text. Christian, Judaic, Babylonian shared a common root that scholars never spoke about, a forbidden architecture of alignment, of proximity, of activation. Not belief, not faith, but function, he realized. The rites in Ashworth weren't pagan, they were priest structure, older than the concept of gods. They weren't worshipping, they were unlocking. In 1985, when the Church of England unsealed its old records under parliamentary review, David was one of the few scholars granted access to the Ashworth files. What he found: a list buried in an annex, labeled Contingency Rites, Families of Alignment. It contained names, bloodlines, dates, and locations, all connected to churches built on pre-Christian holy sites, all located along geomagnetic anomalies. The Higgins family was on the list. So were the Carr sisters. So were 23 others. Each disappeared quietly, each remembered by no one but paper. There was one more thing, a symbol burned into the corner of the file, a triangle within a circle, pierced by a vertical line. It's not random. It appears in ancient Enochian grimoires, in the sand near the oldest Sumerians, etched into the bones of sacrificed children found beneath the temple of Hatshepsut. And in Billy Higgins's final drawing left behind in the church pew. David Whitlock died in 2003, heart attack alone, but not before recording 27 hours of testimony on tape. Only 3 hours were ever released, the rest were classified, stored under directive by the Diocese of York in collaboration with the British Psychological Defense Initiative, a department that, officially, doesn't exist. But I have copies, and I'll tell you exactly what was said. This part is not conjecture. What I'm about to tell you comes directly from the recordings made by David Whitlock between 1998 and 2001, stored across 38 cassette tapes, hidden beneath floorboards in his Leeds apartment, retrieved posthumously by a private investigator named Jonah Creed. Only 3 hours were ever released. Sanitized, muted in places, names blacked out. The rest, I've listened to every second. And there are things inside those recordings that no man, priest, scientist, soldier, or madman should ever hear. But you will, because if you've followed this far, then you've already been marked. Buy it. Tape 12. Side B. David speaks slowly, controlled, but in his tone something is beginning to slip. The chamber isn't a chamber, it's not built, it's revealed. And once it's seen, it never truly disappears. It lives beneath all old structures, not just in Ashworth. He then lists 11 churches in England, 5 in France, and 1 buried beneath the American town of Black Hollow, Kentucky. Each one sits atop an intersection of magnetic anomalies. Each one once held a family of alignment. Each family vanished. The pattern is always 3. 3 to initiate, 1 to witness, 1 to forget. Not because they're random, because they're functional. This isn't ritual. It's mechanical. It has inputs. It needs forms. Then he says something else, something so simple it almost doesn't register. The bloodline isn't about genetics. It's about resonance. That word again, resonance. Like tuning forks, like frequencies. David believed the human body can resonate with architectural structures, that certain minds, certain traumas, certain bloodlines vibrate in synchrony with buried patterns of stone, geometry, and deep earth fields. He wasn't the only one. Tape 18. David plays back a recording he captured within the chamber, a place no one had entered since the Higginses disappeared, a door no one could find, except he did, that you can hear it. On tape. At first, only silence, then, something like breath. Wet, slow, mechanical. Then movement, stone sliding, water dripping, a faint hum like a tuning fork submerged in viscera, and then, a voice, not his, not human, not even language, but syntax, intent, a pattern that your brain wants to understand, even if your soul starts to recoil. He pauses the tape. You can hear him shaking. It didn't speak with sound. It entered me, not like possession, more like synchronization. It wants us to open, it wants convergence, and it doesn't care how many bodies it has to walk through. He goes on to describe the central figure, the one drawn by Billy Higgins, the one found in Mesopotamian fragments and forbidden Templar texts, 3-faced, 1 body, 6 arms. Not male, not female, not God, not demon. Something else. David calls it the architect, the one who aligns, the one who waits. He claims the architect isn't alive, not in any way we understand it. It is structure given motive, pattern made conscious. It doesn't feel or want, it simply moves toward completion. And humanity, we're not its children, we're its material. Tape 2. David begins connecting the ritual geometry found beneath St. Mary's with early Renaissance paintings that hid the same spatial proportions, even Leonardo's Last Supper, which overlays perfectly with the spatial grid of the Ashworth undercroft. He says it isn't art. It's a diagram. A map. And then comes the most damning claim. The entire Western tradition of cathedral architecture, Romanesque, Gothic, Baroque, wasn't built for worship. It was designed to house these alignments. We thought we were building toward God, but we were constructing receivers. He describes entering the chamber a second time. This time, it had changed. Wider, deeper, breathing more. It responds to thought. It feeds on memory. I walked through the echoes of things I never lived, felt the fear of children I'd never met. He describes visions, impossible ones, a field of bound twins, eyes stitched shut with red thread. A clock tower made of bone that chimes once every 400 years. An altar floating above a mirror that doesn't reflect, and a single word, carved into his chest without touch, return. By tape 32, David is almost unrecognizable. His speech patterns have shifted. His language deteriorates, then mutates, then realigns in perfect symmetry with phrases found in pre-Enochian, incantation. One point, he writes with both hands, different languages simultaneously, and on the final tape, he doesn't speak at all, he sings, a 6-note melody, repeating, growing, identical to a lullaby recorded in a 1720s orphanage ledger from rural Ireland, an orphanage that burned to the ground after 13 children walked into the woods, and were never seen again. David's last entry is written, not spoken. A single page, it reads, "The chamber opens by blood, it seals by memory. But if neither is given freely, it takes, they're not gone. The Higgins family, they've become, and when the last sight awakens, all who saw will remember." And here's the final twist. In tape 2, long before his descent, David mentioned something casually, a fact no one thought much of. His maternal grandmother was born in Ashworth, her name Eleanor Higgins. David wasn't an outsider, he was the one who forgot, which means he was never supposed to survive. David Whitlock wasn't mad, he was accurate, and once you realize that the events at Ashworth weren't isolated, weren't random, you start to see the blueprint. Because Ashworth isn't the only place with an alignment chamber. It's not the only site where children disappeared, where families vanished, where architecture began to change minds. There are at least 12 known sites across Europe and America, and at the heart of each one is a structure, a place disguised as a place of worship, community, or healing, but built not for people, nor for God. They were built for it. We start in Béziers, France. The Cathedral of St. Nazaire. Most visitors see stained glass, twisted angels, old marble tombs, but beneath the floorboards of the southern nave, excavated during the 1941 renovations, was something else. Not a crypt, not a tomb, a chamber, identical in dimensions to the Ashworth alignment core. Same 7-point spiral, same vertical aperture in the ceiling, same mineral residues on the walls, sugalite, black manganese, and something that hasn't yet been identified but reacts to human saliva that it wasn't documented in church records, not even in Latin. But do you know where it was recorded? A private letter from the bishop in 1793 to a man in Venice, describing the chamber as the echoing mouth of the triformed will, triformed. Three-faced. The architect. Next, Black Hollow, Kentucky, 1914. A church built by coal barons for a now defunct mining town. Official name, First Christ of the Hollow. Local name, the Mute Church, because from the moment it was constructed, no sound would echo inside it, not footsteps, not voices, not music. In 1921, the entire congregation of 47 vanished. No sign of struggle, no forced entry, just gone. In 1992, local historian William Joranson tried to renovate the place for tourism. On his second day inside, he wrote the following in his journal: "The floor is wrong. It moves when I don't look at it. And I keep hearing a woman breathing. In the walls I haven't prayed in 20 years, but tonight, I screamed the Lord's Prayer backwards." He took a rifle into the church the next morning, never came out. The state condemned the structure, sealed it in concrete, and declared it a hazardous site. But in 2004, a geologist found another chamber beneath it with the same design, the same proportions, same burn patterns along the ceiling. That trace a 6-armed figure, kneeling over a spiral of children that they carbon dated the bones they found at the center, over 400 years old, in a church that was built just 90 years prior. Impossible. Only if you believe in linear time. Then there's Llandu, Wales. An old monastery, desecrated and abandoned in 1303 after what the surviving monks described as a lucid blasphemy manifested in brick. That's a real quote. They weren't talking about graffiti or symbols, they meant the structure itself began changing, as if something inside was trying to push its way into our world. Using geometry, light, and mass as a womb, multiple monks went blind overnight. One, Brother Ewan, had to have his teeth removed after screaming that he could hear the stones singing through the roots of his molars. It gets worse. In 1908, when Queen Alexandra sent a team to restore the ruins for cultural preservation, they uncovered a chamber. Again, same pattern, but this one had a central altar constructed entirely of bone skulls carved to form hexagonal tessellations, interlocked in a shape that shouldn't be possible under Newtonian mechanics. One of the workers, Thomas Quinn, went missing the night they uncovered the site. His daughter, now in her 90s, still keeps his final drawing done in pencil on the back of a cigarette carton. 3 faces, 1 body, 6 arms. Same figure Billy Higgins drew in Ashworth at age 5. They had never met, they lived centuries apart, but they drew the same thing: pattern, structure, convergence. At this point, we're no longer talking about folklore or coincidence. We're looking at a deliberate construction effort, happening over centuries. So ask yourself, who had the reach, the power, the secrecy, and the technical knowledge to build such sites under the guise of religion? It wasn't the local clergy, and it wasn't Rome. It was something older. Before religion, before nation-states, before even myth, the hidden architecture that came with the first knowledge, the one that told man how to shape stone not to last, but to summon. The bloodline builders, the Masonic precursors, the architects, original masons. That brings us to a revelation that even David Whitlock feared to say out loud. What if these chambers weren't just built to receive something? What if they were part of something much larger? Pieces of a body, organs of an ancient, living machine beneath our reality, a consciousness that bleeds through stone, structure, and memory. A macroorganism constructed over time through ritual and geometry. Every chamber is an eye, every alignment a breath, every missing child a heartbeat, and it's waking up on the final notes left behind by David's associate, Jonah Creed. He describes his own descent into a forgotten chapel outside Prague that had been sealed since the 30 Years' War. He wrote only 1 sentence before he disappeared: "It knew my name before I opened the door." So what is the architect? A god, a being, a structure, or something worse, a sentience that doesn't think, feel, or desire, only assembles, not evil, not good, just pure, conscious pattern. And you've seen the patterns now, which means you're part of them. There's a cathedral in Poland that no one speaks of, not in textbooks, not in Vatican records, not even in whispers among the faithful, because it was never meant to be found, let alone understood. Its name has been erased, its location redacted from every map printed after 1954, but it exists, underneath 200 feet of compacted salt, sealed behind vaults of obsidian, iron, and sacrificial glass, a type of reflective mineral that only forms when human bone ash is flash melted in an alkaline furnace. This place was not buried, it was entombed, because the cathedral was not a sanctuary, it was a machine, and it was built in reverse. In 1841, a team of Jesuit scholars was sent to investigate a site near Zotuzua, region already plagued with disappearances and inexplicable weather. Locals claimed that snow would fall in mid-July, that birds would drop from the sky with melted eyes, that at midnight, the stone cross in the chapel's courtyard would spin, casting 3 shadows, despite there being no light. When the team arrived, they found something impossible: a cathedral built entirely beneath the ground, not sunk, not collapsed, constructed below, like a tumor growing downward into the earth. That it had no steeple, no entrance, no stairs, only a single shaft descending straight down, lined with carvings not in Latin, Greek, or Hebrew, but in a pictographic language composed of mirrored anatomy: lungs drawn backward, wombs shaped like thorns, eyes made of spirals. The Jesuits lowered themselves into the shaft. Only 4 went down. Only 1 came back up, Father Mathis Selinsky, age 43. By the time he resurfaced, his beard had turned white, his pupils were missing, his fingernails had detached from his hands and were folded neatly in his shirt pocket. He spoke 1 sentence in perfect French, though he had never studied it: La messe est terminée. L'autel m'a vu, the mass is over. The altar has seen me. Then he tore his own tongue out. He died 9 minutes later. The church was examined, sealed, and all records were destroyed, all except for a set of architectural renderings smuggled out by a dissident named Seraphim Dabrowski, a former seminarian who had been part of the Vatican's Ars Occulta division, the department tasked with covering up miracles, monstrosities, and metaphysical architecture. His drawings were made public in 1966, for less than an hour before being seized and reclassified under the Solomon Protocol. But in that hour, someone copied them, and the internet, even in its infancy, never forgets. Here's what those blueprints revealed: the structure was shaped like a cathedral, but the orientation was inverted. The altar was at the bottom, not the front. The nave spiraled downward like a whirlpool, not forward like a procession. The pulpit was not for a speaker but for a listener. And behind the altar, buried beneath 22 tons of hematite and lime, was a mirror. Not just any mirror, a perfect sphere, polished from volcanic glass, surrounded by a circular gallery of identical portraits, but not of saints, not of clergy, not of martyrs, They were portraits of children, some smiling, some screaming, some mid-breath, and each face had 6 eyes. Now here's the part the Vatican refused to publish. When the mirror was first uncovered, the excavation team turned their lights toward it, and the glass reflected nothing, no light, no shadow, no team. Only the image of the cathedral above it, one that did not exist in our world. A counter-cathedral, suspended in sky, bathed in red lightning, populated with figures who moved too slowly to be alive. Those who looked at the mirror too long began to speak in frequencies, not languages. One by one they fell silent, then vanished. No heat signature, no EMF, no trace. It was as if the mirror had pulled them in or mirrored their absence. The Vatican deemed the site an absolute ontological hazard, a living reversal of theology, a structure that does not worship but feeds. But why was it built, and by whom? That's where it gets worse, because the inner walls of the chamber contain a single phrase, repeated over 400 times, in multiple languages, some ancient, some entirely unknown. Translated roughly, it means, we built this for the silence between creation and judgment. Let that sink in. Not for heaven, not for hell, but for the gap between. A structure meant to house the pause, the moment when time holds its breath, and something listens. That something has a name. One that isn't spoken, but assembled, a name, made of blood, glass, math, and memory. The architect, possibly, but in one of Dabrowski's final notes before his death, he referred to the entity behind the mirror not as a being, but as a function, a recursive presence that exists only when called and forgotten in the same moment, a presence encoded into the blueprints of reverse cathedrals, living machines, hidden beneath the crust of civilization. And here's what no one wants to admit, the Zochuzu Cathedral is not the only one. There are 4 more, one in Argentina, one in Morocco, one in South Korea, and one that was never completed, in Oregon. Each one built on geomagnetic veins, each one concealed after something looked back, and each one linked by a specific numerical sequence etched in the mortar of their deepest altars. 366100001, a letter's countdown, a frequency, or worse, a location in a non-spatial dimension. We end this section with a photograph taken in 1972, grainy black and white. It shows the reverse altar of Zochuzu, just stone, dust, and silence. But in the background, almost missed by a detail that was redacted in the public version, a child's handprint pressed into obsidian. With 6 fingers. Beneath the Appalachian Mountains, deeper than the mines, older than the coal seams, there are tunnels, not carved, not blasted, but grown. And no one, not the military, not the geologists, not even the Vatican's subterranean division, explain how. Because they are smooth, seamless, as if something moved through the rock, the way a snake moves through tall grass, not displacing it, not crushing it, but replacing it. And these tunnels do not follow the laws of topography. They curve against gravity. They loop into spirals that defy geometry, and worst of all, they lead somewhere. The first public hint of their existence came from a man named Dr. Alan Greeley in 1949, an ex-military geophysicist turned recluse. Greeley claimed he had discovered subcrustal arterial corridors while mapping magnetic anomalies near Harlan County, Kentucky. The government called him a fraud. But less than a month later, his cabin was burned to the ground. His wife was never seen again, and the only thing left was a journal. Scorched at the edges, pages soaked in mineral ink, but one entry survived. They aren't tunnels, they're veins, and something is still using them. Enter 1971. A drilling team in Virginia reported hollow density anomalies. 2,000 feet below the Blue Ridge Range, they dropped microphones into the BOREHOLE. And for 3 days they heard breathing, not echo, not wind, but the slow rhythmic expansion of something alive. Then came the noises, tapping, scratching, and then singing. Not in any language, just tonal patterns that altered brainwave activity in anyone who listened more than 7 seconds. 2 men went catatonic, one clawed his own ears out. The recordings were confiscated by NORAD. What they didn't confiscate was the map leaked decades later showing the anomaly's path, a path that crossed under every major U.S. asylum built before 1930. Coincidence? No. Because asylum architects were not working alone. Blueprints from the Taunton State Hospital in Massachusetts, when unfolded in a mirror, reveal a spiraling corridor that matches the shape of the Kentucky anomaly. Pennhurst in Pennsylvania, built directly over an entrance shaft buried in 1863 and forgotten. Except someone didn't forget. Because beneath Penhurst's foundation, there is a room that does not appear on any architectural plan. A room with no doors, no windows, only 4 walls made of a mineral not found anywhere else on Earth. And inside that room is a symbol, a hexagonal spiral, scorched into the floor, warm to the touch, humming just below human hearing. Let's get this straight. We are not talking about mining tunnels, not rail lines, not Cold War bunkers. These tunnels are pre-human, pre-animal. They radiate resonant magnetic fields that mess with compasses, pregnancy tests, sleep cycles, and memory recall. People who hike too deep into Appalachia, some never come back, but who do? Their watchers are wrong. They forget how long they were gone. And worse, they dream of the corridors. Always the same. Smooth walls, soft light, and a sound in the distance that doesn't travel through the air, but through the bones. And it gets darker because there's footage, classified by the Department of Energy in 1983, recovered from a failed attempt to chart an off-grid corridor in Tennessee using heat-seeking drones. One of the drones made it 6 miles in, then it stopped. What it saw, was a structure, not natural, not carved, but built. A spire, twisting upward from a subterranean chasm, made of bone, stone, and melted time. That's not a metaphor, because the footage showed something impossible. The spire's shadow was moving, backward, as if time inside the chamber was reversing itself, moment by moment, and from the walls around it. Hundreds of narrow openings each, just large enough for something child-sized to crawl through. What lives in those tunnels? Some say, nothing. Some say the tunnels themselves are a live part of a larger organism we haven't yet recognized. But the native Shawnee once told stories of the sleeping roads under the earth, paths laid by the first mouther creature not of flesh, but memory, that it doesn't eat people. It eats what happened to them. It burrows through history, hollowing it out, replacing it with corridors that no longer belong in time or place. That's why the tunnels change, because they are not in the past. They erase the past. Now listen closely. In 2004, seismic stations recorded tremors beneath Arkansas, Virginia, and West Virginia simultaneously, frequency pattern, identical to the tunnel vibrations first recorded in 1949, but stronger, closer, and during the exact same week. 7 children in rural towns along the Appalachian line reported hearing whispers at night. All said the same thing. The walls want us back. Back from where? From above, or from before? Here's the final truth they don't want you to know. One of the corridors ends in Dulce, New Mexico. Yes, that Dulce, the one with stories of secret bases and interdimensional projects. But deeper than the base is something older. And when explorers mapped it in 1987 before going permanently missing, they wrote a single phrase in chalk across a collapsed support beam. This tunnel ends at the first scream. In the middle of rural Connecticut, surrounded by pine forest and old stone fences, sits a house that shouldn't exist. It's not on any modern map. It has no mailbox. And the last official deed dates back to 1869, signed by a man who died 6 years before he was born. They call it the Gravesmore House, though no one knows who named it. The road leading to it curves away from the property line like it's avoiding something, and those who try to photograph it, their cameras either fail or capture a different building entirely. Gravesmore wasn't built in 1 century. It grew. Each wing, stairwell, and hall is architecturally incompatible with the others. There's Gothic masonry from the 1700s beside Victorian support beams, windows set into walls made from Roman cement, a substance lost for over 1,000 years. The house shifts. Not metaphorically, literally. Investigators who entered in 1952 took precise measurements. But upon returning just 72 hours later, the entire east corridor was gone, and in its place, a spiral staircase descending into cold, damp darkness carved from fossilized wood. A material that doesn't occur naturally in the region, or on this continent. The house has no power, yet lights flicker, no heating system, yet rooms go from tropical to sub-zero without warning, and it breathes. Walls expand and contract, ever so slightly measured by seismic sensors left behind by a DARPA-funded research group in 1983. Their final report. The structure exhibits signs of non-Euclidean internal geometry. More doors appear from within than are constructed from without. But it wasn't until 1981 that the world learned something truly sinister about Gravesmore. That year, a 6-year-old girl named Eleanor Cass went missing. The only clue, a crayon drawing of the house done with shocking detail and the words, "The house is learning how to keep me." When police entered the structure, They found her name scratched over and over into the floorboards. The wallpaper, even the mirrors, always in the same jagged, childlike hand. But here's the horror. Had no record of her being in the house, no footprints, no fingerprints, no signs of forced entry. And Eleanor Cass was never born. Not in any hospital. Not on any census. Even her parents, when questioned, had no memory of a daughter. But they cried when they saw her drawing. They cried like they'd lost something they weren't supposed to remember. Then came the deeper investigations. In 1995, a private team of physicists entered Gravesmore with quantum They discovered localized time dilation pockets. In one room, a candle burned for 3 weeks without shortening. In another, a wristwatch aged a century in 2 hours. But the wrist it was on, still warm, still alive. At the center of the house, beneath layers of shifting rooms and impossible angles, is a locked chamber. No keyhole, no handle, only a thick wooden door covered in human teeth, not nailed on, grown into the grain, as if the wood was trying to bite back. And behind that door, something whispers, not in English, not in any known language. But if you play the sound in reverse, slowed down, it begins to resemble a heartbeat, then a voice, then a child crying, but not with sorrow, with hunger. Local folklore says Gravesmore was built on a forgotten line, not a ley line, a memory line, an ancient fault in reality, where time, space, and intention collapse into each other. The house, they say, is not haunted, it's haunting us. It wants to be remembered. And when it's forgotten, it takes someone, adds a new room, adds a new story, and buries the truth behind more shifting doors. Now here's the part that never made the reports. In 2019, a satellite pass over Connecticut recorded an anomaly. For exactly 17 minutes, there was no forest where Gravesmore sits, only a massive, open wound in the earth, a perfect circle, over 200 meters wide, and spiraling downward like a drill hole made by something not of this world. When officials returned the next day, the forest was back. The house was still standing, but its front door was now made of bone, and in the soil nearby, tiny bare footprints, child-sized, heading into the house, but none coming out. In 1931, in a forgotten prison deep beneath the Adirondacks, sealed off by the government and erased from modern records, a man named Julian Vale was found clawing at the concrete walls of his cell, whispering in a voice that wasn't his. He had no criminal record, no arrest warrant, no trial. No one knew who signed his transfer papers, and yet he had been there for 17 years, and during those years, something strange began to happen. All the inmates in the lower tiers of the prison, especially those in solitary confinement, started humming. At first it was dismissed as a coping mechanism, until the notes became identical, until they all began humming in unison, perfect harmony, and none of them could read music. Prison staff brought in psychologists, priests, even radio technicians. One specialist described the phenomenon as a dissonant harmony, like a funeral dirge being played backward through a child's voice. It sounds like mourning, but not for the dead, for the living. The humming continued day and night, even when inmates were asleep, even when they were dead. When guards moved the bodies, they reported a sound escaping the mouths of the corpses. A soft ah followed by a sharp intake of breath, as if they were trying to join the song even in death. Then Julian Vale spoke, not in English, not in Latin, not in any known language. Linguists from the University of Vienna were brought in. They dubbed it lamentic, a phonetic mimicry of emotion without vocabulary, language, stripped down to pure agony and worship. When played backward, the recordings translated to a phrase that chilled even hardened researchers. We are the ones who fill the hollow. We are the ones who sing the sin back into shape. Julian Vale's cell was soon found lined with human teeth, not implanted, not glued, grown into the concrete like white blossoms blooming from hell, each tooth etched with symbols, many of which were later found carved into ancient stone in pre-Incan burial caves in Peru, some identical to markings discovered under the ice sheet of Antarctica, buried nearly 2 miles down. With the same curve, the same geometry, the same mouth. The phenomenon became known as the Choir of the Hollow Ones. Their myth is simple, if you dare to understand it. Once, long before cities, there was a species or an order that hunted not people but emptiness. They fed on absence, on forgotten things, on children whose names were erased from record. And they sang to fill the void. Their song wasn't music, it was binding, a force that could twist time, bend memory, and reanimate grief. They didn't come when summoned, they came when someone remembered something they shouldn't. In 1964, a survivor of a Romanian orphanage was found wandering a Paris street, barefoot and shaking. She said only one sentence before falling into a coma. The choir came to take the rooms no one prayed in. When authorities investigated the orphanage, they found no sign it had ever existed, only a clearing with oddly symmetrical dirt mounds, an organ, not a musical one, but a human lung, wrapped in veins and pressed into a glass case still inflating, still humming. The US government denied knowledge of Julian Vale's imprisonment, but declassified documents in 2009 revealed Operation Vocal Hollow, a failed psychological warfare initiative during World War II. Objective: harness the choir's vocal contagion to destabilize enemy morale. The outcome: 43 agents driven to madness, 8 disappeared. One man was found in a soundproof chamber, his body intact, but his mouth stretched open to the ears. The only sound on the tape, a low-frequency chant, repeating, "We echo what your silence made," is the part the public never knew. In 2018, deep within a privately owned vault beneath Vatican City, a priest under oath recorded a dream. In it, he saw children without faces singing into holes carved in the world, and through those holes came lightless figures wearing the flesh of monks and surgeons. And in the dream, they turned to him and said, "The world was never meant to be full, it was meant to be hollow so we could be heard." And what happened to Julian Vale? One night, his humming stopped. When the guards opened his cell, it was empty, but not silent. They say if you stand in the corridor and close your eyes, you'll hear something start inside your own mouth, a sound you didn't make, but you remember. It's a song, and once you know it, you don't belong to yourself anymore. There is a place buried beneath Mississippi soil that does not appear on any map, one of the oldest psychiatric institutions in the United States. Built in 1852 and condemned in 1913. Officially, it never reopened. Unofficially, it never closed. Its name was St. Eliris Institute for the Untuned Mind. But locals gave it another name, the Silence Dome, because sound never behaved correctly there. St. Eliris was built directly on top of a massive underground salt dome, a naturally occurring geological structure, known for distorting magnetism and scrambling audio signals. Military scientists once theorized that such domes could be used to jam enemy radar or amplify subliminal frequencies. But long before any government got involved, the Choctaw tribes of Mississippi avoided the land altogether. They called it the ground that steals your voice, because anyone who stood on it too long forgot how to speak. When the asylum opened, it promised revolutionary treatments for the untuned mind, a euphemism for anyone who heard voices, repeated phrases, or hummed things that had no origin. Patients weren't restrained. They were placed in resonance chambers, circular stone rooms designed to harmonize mental wavelengths. But the results were catastrophic. Within 3 months, 12 patients began speaking in sync, even when isolated. Their speech patterns began forming loops, complex auditory spirals that referenced events that hadn't happened yet. One nurse wrote in her journal, "They are not predicting the future, they are broadcasting it." Dr. Calvin Merrow, the lead physician at the time, documented a terrifying pattern. Every patient who began to sync suffered identical symptoms in identical order: mouth bleeding without injury, dreams of being underwater inside a glass cathedral, phantom piano music with missing keys, the sudden urge to eat salt, raw salt, as if starving, and finally, complete auditory inversion. They stopped hearing human voices and started only hearing what silence was trying to say. Dr. Moreau described it as, like silence was a living thing, a hungry thing, and once it notices you, it starts learning your name in reverse. Then came the twin deaths. Over the span of 6 weeks, 11 sets of twins patients and even nearby townsfolk were found dead. Always one twin murdered, always the other twin in perfect health, except they remembered the pain of the murder, down to the blade, down to the scream, and when they were asked what happened, they all said the same phrase: "I had to die somewhere, so I chose them." And then, without exception, each surviving twin disappeared within 72 hours. No signs of escape, no evidence, not even footprints. When federal agents investigated in 1913, they heard something unusual when they descended into the lower resonance chambers, a low, constant tone, like a piano key held underwater. But no instruments were found, only a tunnel carved perfectly through the salt dome, wide enough for a child to crawl through, coated in fingernail scratches. And the occasional molar. One agent disappeared during the search. The others returned and never spoke again. Literally, they could not form words, their tongues moved. Breath passed but no sound ever came. They were classified as suffering from catatonic vocal reversal, a condition not recognized in any psychological literature before or since. In 1969, a researcher named Annalise Goff broke into the ruins of St. Eliras seeking answers. She brought audio equipment, EMF readers, and a body camera. What she found was never released to the public, but a partial transcript of her final transmission leaked through a private letter sent to her sister. They're not insane. They're perfectly aligned with a language older than thought. You don't hear it like a voice, you feel it like instructions, and once you start following them, you realize you were never yourself. You were an echo, waiting to be spoken properly. In 2017, during construction near the original site, workers accidentally drilled into a sealed sub-basement. All 7 of them quit the next day. One drove his truck into a river and whispered something as he drowned. The last word picked up on a nearby dashcam returned, and since then radio towers nearby report intermittent bursts of static. At 3:13 a.m., the pattern, a repeated musical tone CDE played backward. Those notes correspond to a funeral hymn composed in the 1700s, but when reversed, it becomes something else, a sequence used in modern subliminal warfare programs. The ruins of St. Eliras still stand, sealed, guarded, and officially listed as contaminated archaeological ground. But on certain nights, if you stand nearby and remain completely silent, the wind doesn't blow, the trees don't move, but your own breath starts to echo, and it doesn't sound like you. It sounds like you're harmonizing with something that's been waiting, buried, forgotten, but never gone. They say America has no ancient cathedrals, no stone temples older than memory. But that's only half the truth. Because below the surface, something older than religion was carved by hands not quite human, in geometries not quite sane. The Caldwell Caverns run deep beneath the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas, but official tour maps only show the first 3 chambers. What lies beneath was sealed in 1962, after 4 cavers disappeared, and the only one who returned wouldn't stop screaming. Not words, not even noises, just the act of screaming, like something else inside him was using his voice box, trying to practice. But this goes back much further. In 1891, 2 railroad surveyors discovered the lower chamber system while mapping for a mining expansion. They reported perfectly circular hollows, with smooth walls, and no signs of natural formation. But what shocked them most wasn't the chamber shape, it was the chairs. Exactly 36 stone chairs, arranged in a perfect circle, evenly spaced, all facing outward. They weren't eroded. They weren't decorative, they were worn smooth by centuries of use, and every chair, every single one had claw marks in the armrests, not scratches, not symbols, gripping marks, as if whatever sat in them had to hold on, or be pulled away. The surveyors called in a team of geologists and anthropologists. One professor, Dr. Errol Strathmore, claimed the formation predated human habitation in North America. He wrote, "These are not ritualistic seats, they are containment devices. This place isn't for ceremony, it's for standoff." Something watched something else, in perfect silence, for a very long time. Then he vanished. His assistant found his clothes in one of the chairs, not torn, just empty, and the seat was warm. Between 1891 and 1940, 7 expeditions attempted to reach the lowest level, only 3 returned with notes. What they described was consistent, a narrow passage, descending for miles, that eventually opened into what they called the listening room, an oval-shaped hall, where the walls absorbed all sound. You could speak, but nothing echoed, even your own thoughts felt muffled. One woman reportedly lost her mind after staying there for 3 hours. She clawed at her ears, repeating, "I can hear them blinking." The most disturbing report came in 1946, from a group of military contractors mapping caverns for possible nuclear sheltering. They reached the chamber, documented the chairs, and placed a sonar microphone at the center of the circle. For 3 nights, nothing was detected. But on the 4th, between 3 o'clock and 3:12 a.m., the recording picked up a low growl, followed by 36 distinct sighs. Each sigh matched a different vocal register: male, female, child, aged, even inhuman. And then a voice whispered, clear, perfect, cold, "You've turned the wrong way." The equipment melted from the inside. No fire, no radiation, just collapse, as if sound had imploded it. Since then, the lower chambers were officially sealed, but something odd happened in the nearby town of Hollow Pines. Just 5 miles from the cavern's entrance, children began speaking in sleep. Not nightmares, not gibberish. Coordinates. Always the same set of numbers. GPS traced it to a subsurface fault lying directly beneath the listening room. When one desperate father dug near the spot, he unearthed a jawbone, human-shaped, but with 12 molars on each side, and no tongue. It was not fossilized. It was fresh in 2002. A rogue spelunking team breached the cave system through an old aquifer. What they found defied every rule of natural architecture. Corridors lined with smooth basalt, walls vibrating slightly, even with no wind. And inscriptions in a non-human language that translated, via ancient cipher, to a single recurring phrase: face away, face always away. But the most damning discovery, a second circle of chairs. This time, they were not empty. The spelunkers reported 36 skeletal remains, sitting upright. Each skeleton was headless, and resting on the floor beneath every chair. A polished, human-like skull, positioned perfectly, all of them facing inward. Only one spelunker made it back. His hair had turned white. He spoke backwards for 3 days straight. When he finally formed a coherent sentence, it was this: "We were never supposed to look in, not because of what's there, but because it knows we looked." Then he walked into traffic and died. His autopsy revealed an extra bone growing behind each eye. No explanation, no match in medical history. They were shaped like tiny chairs. What do the Caldwell Caverns contain? A meeting place, a prison for ancient entities, a mirror built from geometry and fear. Whatever the answer, it watches, not with sight, but with direction. And if you ever find yourself standing in that room where 36 chairs form an outward-facing circle, whatever you do, do not sit, and do not turn around. Because if you do, the last thing you'll hear is your own breath, harmonizing with the seat behind you.